sure I have also. Thank you for your efforts. Okay, so we're going to open up with some classical questions, that need to be asked about the about Rosh Hashanah. Right? I think the main question that needs to be raised is that on this day we know we're on trial, and the amazing thing is that if you look through the Nusach HaTfilah, the prayer liturgy, there's nothing, begging God for forgiveness. I mean, throughout the prayer liturgy, we acknowledge that we're on trial, right? But there's absolutely no begging of forgiveness, which, you expect the time to beg for forgiveness is when you're on trial. I mean, you're on trial, so beg for mercy. In the Slichot, we ask forgiveness before Rosh Hashanah, and we ask for forgiveness after Rosh Hashanah, and particularly very much on Yom Kippur, but not on the actual day that we're on trial. That's very strange. Now is the time you're on trial. Now is the time to beg for mercy. So why don't we? It's like we beg for mercy when we're not on trial, be it before Rosh Hashanah, be it after Rosh Hashanah. Right, that's one mystery that it's a problem that really needs unraveling. Right, another aspect of Rosh Hashanah we know is it's the day to accept God as King. Right, so it's a little bit aside from the fact that it's a day of judgment. Right, so one would think that God should have given us Yom Kippur first and only then Rosh Hashanah. Right? Because on Yom Kippur you get atonement. Right? You get all cleaned up for all the bad things that you did. Right? And Rosh Hashanah is when you coronate God and you also stand in judgment before Him. Both of which you could do better if you've been cleaned up already. Right? If you went through the cleansing experience of Yom Kippur, first of all, you'll do better at your trial. Right? Number one, if you have all your misdeeds expunged, right? And also, being a much purer person, a holier person, you'll do a better job and a more sincere job of accepting God as your King. So you would have thought that we should really have Yom Kippur first and then Rosh Hashanah. Right? First get cleaned up and then you're in a better state to stand trial and a better state to accept God as King. Right, and it's not the way it's done. The way it's done is, it's first, first stand trial and then beg for forgiveness. And first accept God as your King and then beg for forgiveness. A little bit, one would have thought it would have been better the other way around. Right. So these are the two major questions we need to unravel. Okay. Now, before we begin to unravel these questions, there's one more thing I want to mention. The Zohar says, and this Zohar is printed in some machzorim, in some prayer books, right before we blow the shofar. Right? The Zohar says that that there's a precursor to what happened, in history, that alludes to Rosh Hashanah, right? And that whole precursor to Rosh Hashanah is the famous story in Parshas Toldos of how Yitzchak, he went blind and he feels that his final days are coming. And he wants to give his blessings, and he wants to give his blessings to Esav, right? And everyone knows the story that Yaakov beats him to it and gets the blessings, right? I'm sure everyone is acquainted with the narrative in the Bible, right? So says the Zohar. So that's like that's like happening again every single Rosh Hashanah. Yitzchak represents the attribute of justice, right? And Esav is represented by the prosecuting angels Esav wanting to feed Yitzchak and get his blessings is, parallel to how the prosecuting angel, the Satan, wants to, feed, as it were, feed God's divine judgment, stories about all our misdeeds to cause him to curse us. But then the sound of the shofar represents Yaakov. When Yaakov went into Yitzchak, Yitzchak said, "Akol kol Yaakov," or did I hear the voice of Yaakov? All right, so the shofar is the voice of Yaakov, and then Yitzchak turns to Yaakov and gives him the bracha. And so also every year Rosh Hashanah, because of the shofar, so God's attribute of judgment, God's attribute of judgment turns towards us and blesses us. It's a very I just quoted the Zohar. Structurally, we have to have an inner understanding in this, and what that Zohar means will become abundantly clear after we lay down the principles to unravel, all the mysteries we've put forth. Okay. So anyway, we'll open up with a Tosfos. Tosfos, the Tosfos commentary on the Talmud, raises a question like this. There's a debate, in the Gemara. There's a disagreement in the Gemara between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. What month was the world created in? Like, when the world was created, what month was it in? Right? The world was created in which season? Right? So, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the world was created in Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah time. And our prayer liturgy is structured according to that opinion, because in our prayers of Rosh Hashanah, it is taken for granted, it's mentioned a few times in prayer, this is the time when God, God, this is the day when you started your creation. Right? But then Tosfos asks a question that in the special supplementary prayers said during the month of Nisan, in the month of Pesach, the month of Pesach, in the special supplementary prayers over there, that not all communities say it. There are special supplementary prayers in the back of the Siddur for the month of Nisan, and all those supplementary prayers are built on the assumption, like Rabbi Yeshua, that the world was created in Nisan, the same month that Passover comes out in. Right. So, so Tosfos asks, it's a contradiction that we find our supplementary prayers for the month of Tishrei assumed that the world was created in that month, and the supplementary prayers for the month of Nisan assumed that the world was created in that month. Right, so it's like a contradiction in our supplementary prayers. Right, because when they talk about Tishrei, they assume the world was created in Tishrei. When talking about Nisan, they assume the world was created in Nisan. Right? So, Tosfos wants to understand what is the how do we reconcile this contradiction? So then Tosfos brings that Rabbeinu Tam said that there's no contradiction. The world was created in thought, as it were, in God's thoughts. The world was created in thought form in Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah, and the world was created, physically, in physical actuality in Nisan, in the month that Pesach comes out in, right? So it's a wild Rabbeinu Tam that we have to understand, right? Saying that the world was created in this month that we're starting tomorrow night, Tishrei. The world was created in thought in Tishrei, and the world was created in physical actuality in Nisan. Right? Get it? This is what Rabbeinu Tam says, right? And we have to try to understand what Rabbeinu Tam is saying. But Chazal tell us, our sages say in a few places, that when God came to create the world, Allah b'machshava libaros b'midas din, Rosh Hashanah miskayim omad v'shitim b'midas ram. God thought to create the world with the attribute of judgment, but he saw that it won't last. So God added the attribute of mercy and then created it. So there's no question that Rabbeinu Tam right, that we quoted a minute ago. It says the world's created Tishrei in thought and in in Nisan, in the month of Passover, in physical actuality. So, what Rabbeinu Tam is saying it is really based on that other statement of our sages, right? The world was created. God wanted to create thought to create the world with judgment. He saw it won't last. He added mercy. Thought to create the world in judgment, right? Saw it won't last, so he added mercy and created it. So, thought to create the world in judgment, meaning, i.e., the world was created in thought with the attribute of judgment. And Tishrei, which is the month which the world's created in thought, right? So that's why Tishrei is a month of judgment, because the world was created in thought with the attribute of judgment. Right? But Nisan is the month where the world was physically created. So that's why we find that Nisan is a month of mercy. Because as we know, we were redeemed from Egypt, even though we didn't deserve it. Our sages say we were in 49 gates of impurity, and God took us out anyway. So it's an amazing thing, that Rabbeinu Tam is saying that the way to understand that famous Chazal, that famous saying of our sages, God thought to create the world with judgment. He saw it won't last. He added mercy. Rabbeinu Tam is saying to understand that statement as literally, God created the world in thought with the attribute of judgment, which is the month of Tishrei, that's why Tishrei is the month of judgment. And God physically created the world. He created the world in action, right, in Nisan, which is the month of mercy. Right? So please tell me if it's getting too complicated. But what we've established by synthesizing the statement of Rabbeinu Tam with the statement of our sages, it comes out like this, that the world was created in a thought form before it was created in a physical form, and the thought form was with the attribute of judgment, the physical form was with the attribute of mercy, right? And the thought form was in Tishrei, and that's why Tishrei is the month of judgment, and the physical form was in the month of Nisan. That's why Nisan is a month of mercy. So far, so good. Right. Is the equation that we set up understood? I need some feedback from the people, because if I'm not understood, I can't go on. I have to... right. Okay. So it comes out like this, that, the world has two parts to it. Reality has two parts to it. It has its thought form and its physical form. I'm watching the browser. I'm right now watching the browser. Okay? The world has its thought form. The world has its physical form. Right, its thought form is built on judgment, and its physical form is built on mercy. Right, it's something very deep. Right, it's something to try to understand the depth of this. Okay, as because with this we're getting to the fundamental, the fundamentals of reality, and yet the fundamentals of Rosh Hashanah also. Right. First of all, God didn't change his mind. The world has two parts to it, and God, first of all, we know that God could never make a mistake, right? So when it says that God created the world, he thought to create the world with judgment, and he saw it can't last, so he added mercy. Doesn't mean that, God ever thought otherwise. But what it means is the proper way to create something in thought is with judgment, and the proper way to create something in physical actuality is with mercy. This is the proper way to go about it. And the proper way to create anything is first in thought and then in action. First think what you want, and then go ahead and do it. So thought always has to come before action. The planning of the project has to come from before the physical creating of the project. And the proper planning of a project should be done with judgment. and the proper physically creating of the project should be with mercy. Now, what does that mean? I'll explain it. And this is something very deep about the attribute of judgment that, we the Jewish people are privileged to know because it was revealed to us in the Torah. Something very deep about the attribute of judgment. The average secular person views law and judgment as a bummer, right? It cramps your style, right? You have your existence, and then someone else gets in your way, and he lays the law on you, right? And if you don't want to conform to the law, you get punished. Sounds like a bummer, right? But that's a very shallow understanding of law, albeit that shallow understanding is probably very correct of secular law, because secular law is indeed maybe nothing more than just a style cramper, just a bummer that gets in the way of your doing what you may have a natural right to do, but it's not the nature of God's law. God's law is much deeper, right? God's law is the real law, and God's law is also the very basis of giving existence. Hear this well, right? God's law is not a cramp, it's not a constraint on existence, right? It doesn't cramp the style of existence. God's law is the very, very basis for existence, very basis for existence. And I'm going to explain how. And I want you to follow with me, right? Right, and we'll explain everything. I see some questions going on the screen, and I'm going to explain everything, right? We say, the proper way to create with thought is judgment. That's for sure true. Listen well, right? When you're creating something in thought, what does that mean? You're planning, and you're setting up a sequence, right? Where it's physical design or a sequence like this will be first. Right, this will be second, this will be third, this will look like this, and this will be so long, this will be so long. You know that all those mental actions are actions of judgment. Judgment, I mean to say, actions of legislation, actions of laying down rules. To set an order, hear this well, to set an order is legislation. Right? You're setting an order. This will be first, this will be second. When you plan something, anytime you're planning something, to plan is to make an order. Order is law, and law is order. Right? There's like the natural law of things. We call the order in the universe, right? The order, we call them the laws of nature. The laws of nature, right? The natural order we also call the natural laws. Now, of course, like I said a few minutes ago, secular law is not the way, because secular law is not the natural law of the universe. But God's law is. And on a deeper level, the very fact that we refer to the order in nature as laws is really rooted in the fact that God, created the world with the attribute of judgment, with the attribute of law. That's what set these firm, unbending order that there is in reality. If God would have not created the world with the attribute of judgment, then there would be no order in reality. Things wouldn't stay in orderly patterns, right? And that's anytime when making a plan. Right? A person, to have a well thought out plan is to really legislate. It's really set in order. It's going to be like this, and it's going to be first like this, and then second like this, and then third like this. Any pattern, any order is really the same as saying legislation. Right? To set in order is the same process as legislating. Right? You're decreeing. This will be first. This will be second. This will be so long. This will be this shape, right? And always the proper way to think is in an orderly pattern, right? Right? Thoughts should be orderly, right? So far, so good, right? even in general philosophy, they talk about the ideal world is the world of ideas, right? But there's a problem, but it just doesn't work out because physical reality lags behind the ideal reality that we've planned out. Right? This in physical matter that it's weak. As we say, the spirit is strong, but the flesh is weak. Right? And that's why I'm answering now a question that was raised, right? What Kathy asked, right? Kathy asked, so what does physical reality have to do with mercy, right? You have to add flexibility. You cannot expect physical reality to keep tight form, right, with the plan that was planned out because the flesh is weak. It's just the weakness of the physical nature, right? Be it the body, which is the physical nature of man, be it the physical universe. It lags behind the plan, right? We find that there's a weakness in physicality, and physicality is meant to have that weakness so as to give man a job to do. That there's room for improvement. The weakness of physicality gives man a job to do, right? There's improvement that needs to be made because physical reality lags behind planning out perfectly in your mind, but fact chance it'll play itself out so well in physical reality. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows when you make a plan, you got to leave some extra time. It'll probably take you longer than you thought. You have to add flexibility. Adding flexibility in the execution of the plan is the same as saying mercy. Mercy and flexibility for our purposes are really synonyms. Right? Is this understood? Right? How are we doing? If there's something not understood, I'm willing to repeat myself. How are we doing? Right. Okay. So, fine. So I want to further explain, the tremendous, kindness that the world, in its thought form, was created with the attribute of judgment, and how the fact that God adds mercy is in no way, in contradiction to God's attribute of judgment. And it's all one continuous plan. It's all one continuum. Right? First of all, everyone knows the famous, idea that's in the Kabbalist that is very well explained by Luzzatto in his different works, that God, created the world, and the agenda, the project in his creating world was to bestow goodness, right? He wanted to bestow goodness, and that's the goal of creation. We're not saying why God needed to create. We're just saying what's the game of life? What's the end goal? The end goal is that that God wanted to bestow His goodness, right? But as Luzzatto goes on to explain, God saw that if you just give it to you, as a giveaway, everyone would just get God's goodness for free, then people wouldn't feel good about it. It would feel degrading. It would feel like charity, right? So God saw that it was befitting, that man should have to work for that goodness. And therefore He gave man free will, and He gave man weaknesses to overcome, and that man should earn it. Now, earning, hear this well, earning means that we should get it, bedin. We should get it, we should deserve it by law, right? To get it for nothing is charity. Charity doesn't make you feel good. Charity makes you feel like garbage, right? Because you don't really feel it's coming to you, right? You're embarrassed when you get it, right? Right? So it comes out like this, from that famous statement of Luzzatto, that, God saw fit that in order for the goodness to be its best, that there should also be no sense of charity and we should earn it. So that means that the attribute of judgment is actually a greater good. You have, aside from the goodness, you have the added satisfaction that you earned it and you deserve it and it's coming to you. So that way it doesn't feel like charity. It doesn't feel embarrassing. Right? So that alone tells you that the judgment and the mercy are not in contradiction to each other. Right? Because of God's unlimited kindness, He created the world with a certain programming of judgment that we should earn our keep, and that would make us feel even better. Right? A wonderful thing to realize. Number one. Number two, and we alluded to this before, right? If the world would have been created purely with a programming of mercy and not with a programming of law, right, then the world would not endure, or there'd be no reason to assume the world would endure. Right? Everyone's going to go to sleep tonight expecting the sun to rise tomorrow. Now I want to ask why do you expect the sun to rise tomorrow? Why should it? Like, if a person does you a favor, right, you can't expect him to do you the favor again because you have no right to demand it. And he also, on his end, he has no need to do it. It was a favor after all. Favor is all voluntary, right? So hear this well. And we alluded to this before, right? Hear this well, right? If God would have not, created the world on a basis of law, then there'd be no reason to assume that the sun would rise tomorrow, right? We assume that the sun will rise tomorrow because there are natural laws, right? And that ongoingness, that we know we could rely on the world to be around tomorrow, right? That ongoingness comes from the fact that God planned out the world with the attribute of judgment, with the attribute of law. And that's what makes it that there are natural laws that we could rely on, that we can expect, right? And this also goes back, to the point that, remember, we can synthesize this point with the point that we made before, right? And that is that we're supposed to earn our keep. That's also that our existence should be by law. That God wants us to must exist. God wants our existence to be firm. Things that are firm and solid and unchanging are things that are built on law. I mean, saying that it's firm, solid, and unchanging is synonymous with saying it's a law. God wants our existence to be a law. If it would all just be a kindness, it's not a law, right? That means that we also can't expect our existence to be ongoing. Just like you can't expect a person to continuously do you a favor. It's a favor. He doesn't owe it to you, right? So you can't expect it to be tomorrow, right? It's a favor. So you don't deserve it, and he has no reason to do it, so you can't expect it to repeat itself, right? But God doesn't want it to be that way. He wants it to be ongoing and firm. He wants existence to be ongoing and firm. That's why He created existence by law. And that's why He also wants us to earn it, that our existence should be ongoing and firm. Right? So far, so good. Okay. Okay, so we'll take it one step further, going back to the proper way to think is with law. That's the proper way to think, right? Because that's called planning. That's called planning, right? That's called planning. That's called reasoning, right? Order. So now the fact that God created the world also with the attribute of judgment, right, is also what, the attribute of law is, aside from the fact that He gave us the naturals, but also gave us a world that we could understand, right? We said that in kindness there is no order, right? In kindness, because kindness, there is no order. There's no reason, no one owes it to anything. There's no cause and effect. In kindness there's no cause and effect. In law there's cause and effect. If God would have created the world not on the attribute of law, right, we would have lived in a non-orderly world, like we said before, and that would be a world that you couldn't understand, right? Thank God He made the world with this attribute of law that gives the world a structure, and it's a structure that we could see and appreciate. besides the fact that we could bank on it, we can make plans based on it, but we could see and appreciate. We look at the laws of nature and we're blown away by the wisdom. Well, the world wouldn't look that way if it was built on the attribute of kindness. In kindness, there is no order. There is no cause and effect in kindness because it's just a favor. It comes out of nowhere. So, like, we live in a world that we can't understand and can't appreciate, right? So our mind being able to appreciate the world comes from the fact that the world also, in thought, is created by the attribute of law, right? So now once we understand how good God's law is, of course, secular law doesn't compare. Secular law is not natural law. God's law is the order of reality itself, and what makes reality firm and ongoing and unchanging and dependable. Right? God's law is what makes our existence firm and eternal. Right? So when God added mercy, it's not a contradiction to the judgment, because God's judgment is for the sake of the greater good. So God, the attribute of judgment itself says, let's add mercy because physical reality needs it. Once you understand that God's law is there to give existence, and it's to legislate existence, to make existence firm, right? Firm and solid. And that's why existence starts with God's law. So since law is pro-existence, it's the foundation of existence, so the law does not mind being tempered with mercy, right, if that's what's needed to bring existence into full actuality, right? So the fact that God added the mercy to the judgment, to make to enable creation to go from thought into action, that wasn't an act of anti-law, because God's law is there for the purpose of creation, for the purpose of existence, right? So God's law is in favor of being tempered by mercy if that's what the physical side of creation needs, right? So, Kathy, not only is without law is there chaos, without law there's no guarantee of ongoing existence. Okay. So, so now the challenge is, the challenge is over here for us to go into Rosh Hashanah realizing this. This is probably our greatest challenge, right? And this is what separates Jew from Goy, right? Yes, God's law is before His mercy, and we're about to say that there's no way to get to His mercy without going through His law first. Just like creation was that way, that it starts with law, because that's the foundation, to legislate existence, to give order, to legislate life, right? And then after that, God adds mercy, He adds the flexibility, right? It's also that way every year as the world is recreated on Rosh Hashanah. The only way to get to God's mercy is through His law, right? Just like it was that way by creation. So, to further spell it all out, there's a midrash that looks at the amazing contrast between our going to Rosh Hashanah, the way we go into Rosh Hashanah, and the way the average Gentile goes into any court case. I'm quoting a medrash. The medrash says, look, whenever a Gentile goes to judgment, right? And when a Gentile goes to judgment, so he goes in, as we say in Yiddish, ois mensch. He looks like he doesn't sleep 3 days before, and he has no appetite, and he doesn't shave, he doesn't bathe. He goes into court looking like a wreck because he feels threatened, so he goes into court feeling like a wreck. And yet we, the Jewish people, and we're standing judgment before the King of all kings. And how do we go into Rosh Hashanah, says the Medrash? We go in, shaven, bathed, dressed in our best clothes, and we eat a festive meal. Right? The Medrash points out this amazing irony. Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Tov, and we don't compromise the fact that it's a Yom Tov in any way. We bathe ahead of time, and we take haircuts, and we shave, and we eat fine food during the meals. It's Yom Tov, and the Medrash considers that the greatness of the Jewish people, that they go into judgment by the greatest judge of all, who has real power, and they go in all, as for lack of a better word, chilled, with a real holiday spirit. Whereas a Gentile goes to traffic court, and even just going in front of a traffic judge, right? He goes in, as we say, ois mensch, not looking like a person, not feeling like a person, all distraught, all depressed, all unkempt. And the Midrash considers that a greatness on the Jewish people's part, that they stand judgment in a festive atmosphere, and this is the depth of it. On Rosh Hashanah, we know that God's judgment is the foundation of existence. We have nothing to be afraid of God's judgment. I'm not saying it is awesome, it is heavy, but it's not destructive. Hear this well. God's judgment, of course, is awesome, and it's heavy, and it's serious, and it's real, but it's not there for the purpose of destroying you. That's the way secular law works. Secular law is all, the Gentile law is all about nailing you, turning the screw on you. They caught you, as the statement, as the saying goes, they caught you with your trousers down. Now they're going to, bring it down on you. That's how secular law works. Right? But that's not God's law. God's law is there to give existence. Right? And not only to give existence, but to make existence firm and solid. And the Jewish people know that. And we have to show that we know that. And that, in a sense, is like a very great form of repentance in its own right. The sinner that puts himself at loggerheads with God's law, he positions himself as anti-law, so for him the law will obliterate him, but it's because he positions himself against the law. But a person could do things wrong, right? But he realizes that God's law is reality, and there's no other life outside of God's law. There is no life. So when you position yourself on the same side as the law, even though you're going to have to give an account for your deeds, but the law is going to be not against you. If you align yourself with the law and you realize God's law is life, God's law is the foundation of life, then God's law itself decrees you must live and decrees. Hear this well. The law itself decrees that you should have mercy. And the mercy is granted to you by law, and that's mercy you could depend on if it's granted to you by law. Here's what the Medrash says about the shofar. When we blow from the shofar, God gets up from the chair of judgment and then moves over to the chair of mercy. So what is that? It's a game. We just blow, and then all of a sudden the court case is over. So the Midrash further explains that just like in shofar, you blow in. They are different. Mercy and justice are two different attributes, but they are not different as in opposites. They're actually a continuum. You go from one phase to the other phase. Matisyo, I'm in the middle of quoting a Medrash. Right? I'm in the middle of quoting a Medrash that'll make this all clear of what exactly is the ratio between God's judgment and His mercy. Again, this is all true by God's judgment and His mercy. We keep on saying that by secular law, it doesn't work out this way. Right? Secular law is a real bummer and a real style cramper. Right? But not God's law. God's law is the foundation of existence. Right? God's law is not a contradiction to mercy. Right? The Medrash says, when we blow shofar, God says to us, I will be to you just like this shofar, just like the shofar. You blow in one end, and the sound comes out the other end. So also I get up from the chair of judgment, and I sit on the chair of mercy, and I turn the judgment into mercy. Now, seemingly, you would think that the equation is not solid. The shofar, it's an in-out relation. Blow in, sound comes out, and you would think that going from judgment to mercy is not in it versus out, but rather right side versus left side. It's God switching sides. But the Medrash is not saying that. The Medrash says that the relationship between God's judgment and God's mercy is like the shofar. In on one end, out on the other. Right? So now I'm going to explain that. What's in and out? In you, in the people. In us, what's in? What's in? What's our inner world? Our inner world is the world of our thoughts. Right? What's our outer world? Our outer world? Our actions. Right? Our actions. That's our outer world. Our actions, are the... and it's this difference between soul and body. Soul is our inner world. What do we have from our soul? We have thoughts, our ideas, right? And the body does the actions. So inner world, outer world is thought, inner world, actions, outer world. And as we've said before, the thought world is all judgment, because thought looks for order. Thought, orderly thinking. Definitions. No, there are midot in thought and there are midot in action. Each one has its own midot. Right? So now we said thought is judgment and action requires mercy. Right? Right. So now what the Medrash says is clear. Like the shofar, blow in. The blowing in represents, the thought world. Right? Out comes sound. That's the action world. God says, be like the shofar. Right? Align your thoughts with me. Say to God on Rosh Hashanah, God, I'm with you. I'm not against you. I'm with you. I'm not against you. Do to me what you want, but whatever happens, me and you are on the same side. That's the statement we have to make on Rosh Hashanah. Right? Blow in to the shofar, blowing in, going in. Represents, our inner world, our being committed to God in our inner world. And indeed, what happens on this day is called Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. It's one of its biblical names, and that's the name that it has in our prayer liturgy, is the Day of Remembrance. Right? This day, we find our place in God's thoughts. This is the month when the world was created, as it were, in God's thoughts, and that's all in judgment, and that's why it's a month of judgment. And we have to find our place in God's thoughts. That's why it's called the Day of Remembrance. We find our place in God's thoughts. God remembers us. We find our place in His thoughts. And this is a famous midrash that when God, contemplated creation, the first thing He thought of was the Jewish people. The Jewish people are rooted in God's thoughts, i.e. rooted in the same place where God's judgment comes from. And that's our challenge at Rosh Hashanah. Find your roots in God's thoughts. Find your roots in God's law, and then you and the law are on the same side. And once you're on the same side, the law is behind you, not against you. The sinner, right, doesn't want to reconcile, the sinner, not the person who fails, but the sinner who's rebelling, he positions himself against God's law. So for him, God's law will be a obliterating force because he positions himself, as oppositional to God's law. But if you're on the same side as God's law is going to look for a way to mandate your existence. God's law, it will decree adding mercy. Right? That's the beauty of Rosh Hashanah. And I want to tell you, there's no other way to get to God's mercy except through His law. Right? Just like the world was created that way, so also it's the way the world is recreated every year. Face God's law. Position yourself as being on the same side as God's law, and God's law now works for you and decrees mercy upon you. You can only get to Yom Kippur through Rosh Hashanah. You can only get to God's mercy through accepting His law. And if you do it that way, your mercy is guaranteed because the law is behind you. Whatever, the law is the law, so the law is behind you, dictating. The law works with you if you put yourself the same side of the law. Right? The Gentiles don't understand that. That's why when they stand judgment, right? They go into court all depressed because they view the law, as right. They view the law as oppositional to them. Right? The Jewish people understand that God's law is the root of their existence. God's law is what makes the Jewish existence firm. That's why we go into Rosh Hashanah with joy. And the main work on Rosh Hashanah is to put ourselves on the same side as God's law. That's the main thing, and that's the main thing to have in mind. And that's why it's not a time to try to run away from the law. That's why in our prayer liturgy we don't give God any of the excuses. It's not the time. The time now is to position yourself on the same side of the law, not to make excuses. Making excuses is, avoiding accepting the law. We have to accept God's law on this day. And accept it, so as we put ourselves on the same side. So even though it's both, Rosh Hashanah, as we explained why. It's the day of judgment. It's also the day of being remembered by God, because it's both the same thing. We're finding our roots in God's thoughts. Right? By putting ourselves on the same side as His law, saying, although we fail, God, we fail. There's a difference between failure and rebellion. We don't rebel. We fail. So God says, failing is, you have to pay for it, but it's okay. I will add mercy. But, the judgment has to add mercy. You have to first position yourself on the same side as the law, and then the law works for you to find a way for you to continue. The law is behind you, and the law will dictate mercy. You put yourself in opposition to the law, you won't get mercy. You can only get mercy through the law. That's the only way to get to mercy, and that's also the mercy you could depend on because the law is behind it. And the avoda, the divine service of Rosh Hashanah is to accept God as King, to accept His law upon us, and not make any excuses. Don't make any. This is not a day to make excuses. There's not a day to say sorry because it looks like you're trying to avoid the law. It is a day to accept the law. We accept God as our King, and we accept His law. Right? Right? And we have to put ourselves on the same side of the law. And if you put yourself on the same side of the law, you could be sure you'll have mercy. Because the law will work for you because you're on the same side. It's a mistake to, put yourself in opposition to the law. Right? And that has to be our attitude towards Rosh Hashanah. A person who his attitude towards Rosh Hashanah is, right, if a person, God forbid, would have the attitude of, this is the annual pain in the neck, this is the annual problem I have to get over, this is the annual hurdle I have to get over, you're putting yourself, right, you're putting yourself on, in opposition to the law, right, and that's the opposite of what Rosh Hashanah is all about. You have to look forward towards Rosh Hashanah, re-accepting God as your King, re-accepting His law upon you no matter what the consequences, because there's no other life. There is no other life. There is no other option. God's law is the foundation of existence. And for those who work with the law, so mercy is guaranteed by the law. Those who work against the law won't get mercy. And this is the challenge, also between us and Satan on this day. Satan doesn't understand what the Jewish people understand. Satan thinks that he could use God's law as a destructive force, and he prosecutes us on this day. But when we blow the shofar, right? When we blow the shofar, we bring out that law is all about giving existence, and this goes back to that Zohar that sees a precursor to Rosh Hashanah, or a parallel to Rosh Hashanah, I should say, a parallel to Rosh Hashanah. In the whole story of Yitzchak and the blessings will go to Esav, will go to Yaakov, right? That, Yitzchak we know represents the attribute of judgment. I don't have time to explain this right now, right? And Esav tries to get that attribute to work for him, right? There are destructive forces. There are people that want destruction. There are people who have death wish, right? 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 And that's he wants to Yitzchak to turn towards him. He wants to use the law destructively. But then Yaakov beats him to it, and the Zohar says that when Yitzchak was is so happy when he gives the brachot to Yaakov instead of Esav, because law is all about legislating existence, making laws of nature, making laws of existence, making laws that lead to mercy. And we know Jacob's attribute is the one of mercy. That's supposed to be the real relationship. Judgment is supposed to lead to mercy. Judgment is pro-existence, and therefore judgment leads towards mercy. And that's the mistake that Esav made, and that's why Esav was not successful. And that's the mistake that Satan makes every Rosh Hashanah. He tries to turn God's judgment into a destructive force, and it doesn't go. It doesn't go for him. Because the minute we blow shofar, we demonstrate we are on the same side as the law, and immediately the law turns to mercy. I said a mouthful. Is this clear? I need to know the consequence. I'll deal with the Noachide questions in a minute. I need to know if we're being clear. Okay, so with this we can understand that with this we can understand why it's not a time to ask God for forgiveness, because it looks like we're avoiding the law. And we can understand, therefore, why Rosh Hashanah has to come before Yom Kippur. There's no way to get to the mercy except through the law, right? Because God's law is life. And if you're on the same side as the law, you have life, and the law itself will demand that you have mercy, and that's the mercy you could depend on. Whereas if you're against the law, you won't help up as oppositional to God's law. Now, of course, everyone keeps the law to the extent that they can, right? The Ben Noach has to re-accept God's 7 laws, and all their bylaws on this day, right? Yes. Acceptance of God as king, and acceptance of his rule, acceptance of his judgment. Be on the same side as his law, and his law works for you. So even though you failed, and you have to give an accounting for that, but his law, it will only give you life and find ways to give you life. His law will demand that you get mercy. So it's acceptance of God's kingdom, acceptance of God's law. And saying sorry, it looks like you're trying to avoid it. And acceptance of God's law is the foundation of existence. It's the foundation of getting to mercy, because it's the foundation of life. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is about, right? And that's what the shofar is about. At the time that we blow the shofar, it's a commitment to be connected to God with our minds. Ideologically, we're on the same side, so even if the flesh fails, the flesh may fail, but ideologically, we're always, right? 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 And that dictates mercy, and then God gives us the next 9 days after Rosh Hashanah to fix our actions also. We deserve to have that chance to fix our actions and to have mercy regarding our misdeeds, because we are on the same side of the law. And of course, we reconcile ourselves with the law, which is God's thoughts, in our thoughts on Rosh Hashanah day. And that's what's represented by the shofar. Now, the time to ask forgiveness is before Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, not true. It is before Yom Kippur that it is customary to ask for forgiveness. Because Yom Kippur is a day of forgiveness. We have to forgive each other, just like God forgives. That's before Yom Kippur. For some reason, the custom got expanded, and people started asking forgiveness on Rosh Hashanah already, I guess to beat the holiday rush. But no, the real custom, the real halacha of getting forgiveness from your fellow man is before Yom Kippur, not before Rosh Hashanah. Right? And regarding your earlier question, a person who doesn't believe in God's law will not have mercy. That's 100% true. Or I should say he doesn't deserve mercy. Sometimes God, almost all the time God gives mercy even when undeserved, but a person who's not on the same side as God's law doesn't, legally deserve mercy. God may give it to him anyway. It's God's business. No, on Rosh Hashanah, we re-accept God's law. So we don't look at the past. We don't look at the past. The challenge of Rosh Hashanah is to accept God's law and to declare yourself aligned with it. That's what we have to do on Rosh Hashanah. That's what it also means to accept him as your king. Put yourself on the same side as his law. This is what we must do on Rosh Hashanah. This must be accomplished. That's the happiness of Rosh Hashanah. Being remembered by God, finding our place in his thoughts, being aligned with his law. This is Rosh Hashanah. And it is the happiness of Rosh Hashanah. Right? Now, don't get me wrong, there's certain awe. There's trembling, but that's because, obviously God's law is heavy and serious. But it's not destructive. It's not against you. It's only for you. If you just put yourself on the same side, then it's for you, not against you. So it may be heavy. It may be heavy. It may be heavy, and it may be awesome, and that's why we don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah, because there is still a theme of awe, so we can't really sing, right? But it is a Yom Tov, like that medrash that we quoted. We go in fully bathed, shaven, we eat well, we dress well, right? So it is a Yom Tov. Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Tov, right? But it's heavy, but it's a Yom Tov. And there's, you understand the difference between something being heavy and something being against you. We know that God's law is not against us. It's only there to legislate our existence and make our existence firm, right? So we know that God's law is not against us. It's still heavy and it's still serious, but it's not against us. It's not there for our destruction. It's there to legislate our existence. Okay, I think we answered all our questions. I think I'm repeating myself. Before I know there's another speaker about to come on. Last call for questions. Noachites just accept whatever God's law as it applies to them. The Noachites accept God's law and judgment as it applies to them. Everyone just right. Everyone accepts God's law as it applies to them. We have 613 mitzvot. They have 7, but they're both God's law equally. Any other questions? All right, I want to thank Ephraim for making this possible. All right, Ephraim, some people emailed me right before I began this shiur that they couldn't get into the chat room. And I was watching the participants. I see that some people emailed me just didn't make it in for some reason. They had complications. So please, where will this shiur be posted? What link will it be posted at for those who missed it should be able to hear it? Can you tell me that now? Okay. So, I want to thank everyone for coming. It's an honor for me to